The first known formal complaint is now filed over a deadly U.S. strike in the Caribbean. The family of a Colombian fisherman, Alejandro Carranza, says he was killed in this September 15 strike that you're seeing on your screen. They want compensation and an end to these killings. Their attorney, Dan Kovalik, is joining us right now. First of all, what are you seeking in this petition against the United States officials?
Well, as you mentioned, the family, of course, wants compensation. They've lost their chief breadwinner. By the way, he earned his money by being a fisherman. He was out fishing for marlin and tuna when he was killed. But the other thing they want equally is to end these killings. They want to deter the United States from continuing to do this in the future.
The Trump administration has gone very hard on those in these boats. We've talked to many different lawmakers who have yet to see the evidence that they are narco-terrorists or drug traffickers, but that is what the administration is saying that they are. What is the evidence that you will use to show that your client is not that your client, as you say, is a fisherman?
Well, first of all, the onus is not on us to prove he was innocent. It's on them to prove he was guilty. By the way, all these people are innocent because where I come from, you're innocent until proven guilty. But in any case, his family, the Fishermen's Association that he was part of, can all say that he was a fisherman and that's what he was doing. But again, if you want to prove someone's guilty, you need to take them to court. You need to try them. You just don't summarily kill them. So, again, the onus is on the U.S. government here.
Yeah. In any case, the onus is on those who are in the process of trying to prove what someone was or was not doing. I do want to ask you, though, how certain you are that you will see any compensation by suing U.S. officials, in that the client that you have is not a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, well, that's not a problem. That's why we brought this before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which gives a venue for non-U.S. citizens within the Western Hemisphere to bring a petition against the United States as a state for various remedies, including compensation. Now, with that said, am I certain they'll get compensation? I mean, whenever you bring a case, you can't be certain of that. But this is an avenue to do that. And I think with this case combined with public pressure, which I think is building against these strikes, I do think we can get them compensation. And I think this case will play a part in ending these killings.
What message is the family trying to send directly to the Department of Defense, to the Defense Secretary, and to ultimately the President of the United States?
I mean, what they're doing is wrong. It's morally wrong. It's legally wrong. At one point, Pete Hegseth even admitted he doesn't even know who's on these boats. And in this case, he didn't know. I hope he didn't know that this was just a fisherman who was killed. And again, they want this to stop. They want the U.S. to live up to its own values as a country that values democracy and due process and human rights. And I think the U.S. has really gone off the rails in terms of these killings. It's really destroyed its status in the world.
Dan Kovalik, thank you for coming on. We'll be following this case. I hope you will stay in touch with us to see what happens, as this is the very first person to come forward to sue under the circumstances that are being looked into now. I do appreciate it.
Right now, lawmakers are demanding answers, and Republicans appear to be growing increasingly dismayed by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth after that controversial follow-up strike on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean in September.
Do you have confidence in Secretary Hegseth?
We'll make our decisions based on the facts of the case. We haven't got the facts yet in front of us in a classified setting.
Do you have confidence in him?
Would you say that? Can you say if you do?
Thanks for your time.
And joining us now to discuss this and more, Democratic Senator Jeff Berkley of Oregon. He serves on the important Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. As you know, CNN is reporting that Pentagon officials have been making the case for that follow-up strike because survivors were still, quote, in the fight, their words, in the fight, and radioing in for help. Is that a satisfactory justification for you?
Oh, absolutely not. These are extrajudicial killings. Let's start with the first strike. There is a legal way to board a boat and check and see if there are drugs. It's done by the Coast Guard all the time. But the first strike was extrajudicial. And then you have two helpless men clinging to debris, and perhaps they made a radio call for help. We're getting details on that hopefully soon. But two helpless men clinging to debris, radioing for a rescue, hardly means they're in the fight. They weren't in the fight even before the first strike. How could they be in the fight when they're helpless clinging to debris?
And the Defense Department has argued, that theoretically they could have continued the mission by radioing from help and continuing the trafficking. That is what they're arguing. But based on what you just said, do you believe a war crime was committed? And if so, where do you see the accountability?
If this was a legal action of war, which is still under dispute, then it would be a war crime. If it was not, it was a murder. In either case, again, the right way to find out if there are drugs aboard a boat is you stop the boat, you board it, you investigate it, and in the process you learn if there are drugs, you learn about the strategies involved, which gives you information to help dismantle a broader operation. Blowing a boat up, not even knowing much about what the boat is doing, simply destroys that type of information. So it's not only extrajudicial, it is also stupid. And so this is vast concerns about judgment. And by the way, of course, this is all a prelude to the possible strikes on Venezuela itself.
And as you know, according to sources familiar with the Pentagon Inspector General's report, Secretary Hegseth risked endangering the lives of U.S. troops by sharing very sensitive, highly classified war plans on the messaging app called Signal back in March. Hegseth and the Pentagon are painting the report in a very different light. They're saying it's a total exoneration, their words, total exoneration of the secretary. What's your response to that finding?
Wolf, I spent several years working for the Secretary of Defense, and in those years there were posters that said, "Loose lips sink ships." And I keep thinking about that in the context of how could anyone in the Pentagon say, we are now going to say this information about when we're conducting a military operation, including when the first strike will happen, would possibly be unclassified. Hegseth is arguing that, he unclassified the information right before he put it into the Signal. This is an after-the-action defense that makes no sense to anybody who has any understanding that that type of sensitive information really does endanger a military operation.
So between that Pentagon Inspector General report and the controversial follow-up strike in the Caribbean, do you believe Secretary Hegseth should either resign or be removed from his office?
Absolutely.
Well, what are the conversations like with your colleagues across the aisle? Do you get the sense that that is a growing sentiment?
There has been such a sense of my colleagues that they are not ready to confront Trump over the mistakes of this administration, but we have started to see cracks in that following the November election a month ago, where they're starting to feel like they have hitched their wagon to a horse that's going to take them over a cliff, and they better start separating themselves some. So it'll be very interesting to see what the Republicans say after they come out of these briefings today. I think some may say they have serious concerns. It may be more gentle language like that, but we are certainly starting to see that my Republican colleagues in the Senate are getting very nervous about being tied to not just to Hegseth, but some of the overall actions of this administration.